We've not actually formally or legitimately spoken about what AI means in architecture, when it came around, and what occurred in all of these things, in part because we're not experts in there. You are, so I think us and certainly our listeners would love to hear from you. For like, how has it been going, broadly speaking, with AI infiltrating architecture, and then leading to, of course, what Chaos is doing specifically.
All right. Well, first of all, just a bit of a congratulations on avoiding the hype train. I'm not sure how you dodged that one, but well done, because AI, of course, is everywhere.
Yeah.
But I think you really are engaging it at the right time. And I think maybe we can start with where we are, but I think where we are is most fascinating when we look at where we've come from and how quickly that transition has occurred. I think I'll mention a few things. One of them is that we heard from one of our customers, and it made a lot of, in the rounds of Chaos. This was back probably about maybe November or something like that of last year. It was actually a customer down in Australia, and they were telling us, we had a call with them just to check in. They said, I used to model to render. So they would model in SketchUp or something like a Rhino, and then they would do that very quickly just for the purpose of being able to visualize in the context of our Enscape software. And they said, to be perfectly honest, now essentially I render with AI to model. It's a complete inversion of the process that they had been using for years. And what that meant is that the exploration no longer required them to go into a modeling program anymore. They could have an idea, they could literally have a sketch and use that as the basis to create renders. And then from a render, they can prompt and explore and sort of negotiate to get something that they actually liked. And then they model, with modeling being something that's just always more time intensive, and it's something where you don't want to have to do too many iterations, because it frankly takes more work. Mm-hmm. And to us, that was, it's one of those things where you think, okay, that's a bit of a paradigm shift when you hear that. And shortly after that, I was at an event in Washington, D.C., where there were a number of people on a panel talking about how AI was used in their tool or in their production workflows. There was someone from Thornton Tomasetti there. There's someone from Gensler there. And what was interesting is the Gensler individual, he were part of their pursuit team, actually led their regional pursuit team for projects. And they were talking about the traditional workflow. You create a model, a couple of nice hero shots, and then maybe a mini video. And he said, at this point, I don't even model anymore. He's like, I'm an art director. They had actually created their own internally trained LoRa that pulled from all of their past projects and trained that on top of one of the AI rendering engines. And so now they could go from essentially a very schematic prompt of a particular typology, a location, a bit of a program document, and then from there actually start to get a building. And they weren't just getting a building, they were getting a whole scene. And he showed a movie that they had created beyond prompts. It showed a couple in first class flying over Manhattan, holding hands. Then it shows them in taxi cab, rolling up to this place, and there's the building, all AI. They walk into the building, all AI. They go up to their apartment, they're brushing their teeth, they're making breakfast, they're having coffee looking out over a little veranda, all AI. There was never a digital model created in the sense of something in Rhino or SketchUp, and they use this to submit for the project. You see something like that, and you're like, things are different. And then on top of that, we do a survey every year across the broader industry, and we always throw in AI topics. And there was something that popped up this time that really caught my attention. We asked people quite specifically, how much time are you saving, or are you saving time through the use of AI tools, and how much are you saving? Mm-hmm. And about 50% of the people said, yeah, we're using AI tools and saving time. And the largest number of people that were saving time was per an employee at firms that had 50 to 99 people in the respondents. They were saving 10 to 15 hours.
Per week?
Basically per a designer that was using AI in their firm. That's astounding when you think about what that means. That's not nibbling around the edges anymore. That's a a pretty fundamental shift in what's happening. Now, obviously, those savings aren't going to be fully distributed. Some people might be doing specifications or something. Maybe they're not using AI as much, but there's certainly people, obviously, within that company who are using it and using it to great effect. So I put those pieces together, and the ground is shifting underneath our feet at an accelerating rate.
And so remind me again, when was the timeline for these three pieces of information? How long ago were we talking about?
Well, that was a fascinating part. They're all really from the latter half of last year to now. So very quickly. And when we go further back, things were pretty slow. I remember having a customer advisory board meeting in 2023, and we asked people, this was late 2023, and we asked people about AI tools, and they're like, nah, lawyers won't even let us touch them. Like, they're not getting on the site. We need to have some way, if you're going to sell a software, there needs to be a way in which we can block AI tools.
Right.
And this is gone.
Yeah.
Which is wild. It's like one of those things where we used to have a certain development cycle where you could think on a particular time horizon. And now as a company, if you're thinking, in a 6-month or a year-long time horizon, saying, okay, we need to take this precious little thing, carefully refine it, iterate it, and roll it out, it doesn't work anymore. Not even close, the way that the speed that we're seeing now.
It's a bit of a tangent, but I have wondered for you guys and tech companies in general, how the heck do you adopt and adapt so quick? I imagine it's much quicker, like you're saying. Like, how does that work? And actually, this is maybe a dumb question, but it's not clear to me what. It's funny because AI came in a big sweep, kind of like at once. It felt like within a year, everyone was talking about AI. It was pervasive. All tech companies were leveraging AI, and I've never really understood, like, what is there just like one piece of code that was released into the wild and that allowed all these companies to adopt it? Like, from your standpoint, how's it been to traverse all this new terrain?
Well, part of it is it seemed kind of nifty, and somewhat limited in its capabilities. So I wouldn't say it's like it's been a slow rising of the tide, or slow-ish, maybe. So when you think about some of the first stuffs, we had large language models where you could enter a prompt and sort of have a conversation with it, and they were okay, not great. Some funny errors. I think people that wanted to resist the technology over-fixated on the errors and sort of undersold the possibility and the potential. And then I think the first time I was actually going through our write-ups, and I think it was basically around the start of 2023 where we saw the first AI image generator that had some applicability to architecture. So basically, we're looking at 3 years now, 2.5 years. And that one was bad enough that there was a lot of like, this is never gonna do it kind of a thing. And now we've gotten to the point where the technology is quite robust, but that's not really where the true acceleration has occurred. The real acceleration, I think, has occurred in the accessibility of these tools to do the more sophisticated and advanced workflows. People refer to the agentic workflows. So you think of like Claude got a lot of attention, one of the large LLMs, with agentic workflows, in which those are sort of like recursive tasks. So you can have it perform a task, check the constants, depending upon the outcome of it, refine it, iterate it, things like that, all independently. And that is a huge difference in capability, because you can actually tell that agent what exactly you want it to do. And given different inputs, it'll perform a different outcome. And it can be pretty remarkable. And there's a lot of examples of people that, of our customers, using those as part of their design workflows. Now, the other part of your question was kind of like how quickly, or how does a company itself adapt, I think, in this context. Is that correct, David?
Yeah.
So that's an interesting one. And I would probably echo maybe some of the sentiments our CEO has been saying. And I think these are probably lessons that I would say are applicable really to any organization or an architectural practice as well. The first one is you just have to dive in and face your fears here. I think there's a lot of concern that these things can be overly intimidating and things like that. And I think as a way of sort of showing that everyone's got to be a little vulnerable in the face of this emerging technology and jump in. Our CEO actually vibe coded her own website and presented it to everyone in an all hands the other week. I wouldn't say, she's not going to win a design award. And I don't think any web designers are quaking in their boots, worried about losing their job. But it does show that you have to be willing, and that someone who has zero knowledge of this was able to actually create and deploy a website. And that's the kind of capability I think that's really remarkable, is you can say, okay, you're able to actually just jump in and do this. And I think that's the other piece that is both remarkable in the sense of what it means in the practice. Like, you can actually take these tools and do very sophisticated things as long as you have an idea of what you want to do. But for a company, it's also a lesson that you just have to do it, and you have to move fast and not be afraid. Jump in with these tools, try it, and experiment. So an example of how we might have to accelerate is, it used to be if you wanted to do something, you would probably spend a fair bit of time planning, maybe getting some feedback, drawing up concepts of software and the user experience, and then go into a coding exercise, because coding was pretty labor intensive. We've now inverted that a little bit, kind of like our customers are, where we can just vibe code what we want and be able to use that as a proof of concept to essentially solicit feedback from the customers. And based off of that, if it's good, you're going to get really high quality feedback, and then you can move over to a more formalized development process, which is also going to be pretty heavy as far as an AI coding process itself.
Right.
And what that does is it vastly speeds up that iteration loop between idea and getting something to market. And that's something that we're having to lean into, and it's disrupting the way we do things internally. There's, for a lot of people, they've never done that, obviously.
Yeah.
It's very uncomfortable. It's almost an example of what you were not supposed to do traditionally in development. And now we're in a position where we actually have to do it in many ways to survive. Like, the iteration cycle with our competitors is just too tight.
And as you're speaking, this is all incredibly fascinating. And as you're speaking, there's, I think, a lot of parallels to the workflow in architecture that you described. It's funny, I think, amongst our architects, and I know that you know this, before AI, one of the big concerns any architect or designer had is, okay, so let's say we're in the early concept design phase and we're testing out ideas with a client. If we show them a rendering that's too realistic, too detailed, that they become too fixated on like the details which were not really meant to be doing.
Yeah, they get bugged by the green couch or the the brass doorknob or something.
Exactly. And of course, then there's the other dialogue of like, well, some clients want that. Does it make sense? Does it not make sense? Do I do it? Do I not do it? But you're the word of like inversion and inverting the process, I think, is dead on. And in a certain way for architects, maybe not. It's sort of a return to maybe how things happened before, because when prior to computers, if we wanted to do a perspective rendering, a presentation image of an idea early on, it's constructed as a 2D image. It's not a model that you model and then finesse the window sizes and the mullions and all that stuff, and then hit render and then tweak in Photoshop and all those other stuff. You just draw the thing old school on a piece of paper, 2D, and it's just an image, and it presents an idea, and it might have more detail or less detail. And if the client likes it, then you basically work backward and say, okay, now there's a bunch of other stuff we need to figure out to service.
But it's a low investment. It's that low initial investment. Yeah, and that's what I kind of like, how AI visualization, particularly in early design, is almost bringing back the art of sketching in that sense. It does absolutely capture the intent of what architectural sketching is supposed to be.
Fascinating. There's plenty more to talk about, the broad scope, but I want to get into what Chaos has done and what specific, topics or features and things have been rolled out, and how are you guys tackling the question of AI and architecture? Are you, in the bigger sense of ethos and philosophy, are you just trying to do everything? Are you being particular with how you want to leverage AI?
So there's couple of pieces there. I'd say one is, I can always show you. I always have queued up some content to show you some things that are it's quite genuine. So you're going to see some live recordings, if you will. So this won't be it may be canned, but it's not going to be artificial. And then I think the other thing I would say is probably to echo our chief product officer, Alan Poor, who says, I really don't want AI features that are tacked on. And that's absolutely right. Everything that we're doing with our AI features have to be part of a workflow. We have an ecosystem of tools. AI, within the context of that ecosystem, needs to function across all of our various software, accelerate workflows between those software. So if you're in one of them, AI can actually be used to, say, get to another tool more quickly, or if you're in another tool, be able to get to that rendered outcome that you want, sort of manifest that design vision more quickly. So that's one piece where say not the tacked on, it's really integrated. But then the other piece that we're pretty cognizant of is that we have 25, actually almost closing in on 30 years of history within the industry. And that means that we understand visualization probably better than anyone. One of the founders of the company is actually the head of our innovation lab. So it's still there, which is, I think, awesome. I love the idea of someone who's like, what do they want to do in life? It's like, we'll run the innovation lab. He could be doing anything. He could be sailing on a boat in the Mediterranean, and instead he's doing that, which I think really speaks well of our company and him as a person. But what it means, though, is that if we're releasing an AI feature, it's going to reflect that legacy of knowledge. It's not something that is like, okay, we're checking a box. If we release one, we really want it to be a top tier feature that is as good as will be needed by someone who's making a movie with the VFX that are going to stun people on Saturday night. And that's sort of our rule. And not everything is there yet, but that's what we're working towards. And everything, every month and whatnot, we're making updates, refining things, like improving them, so that these AI tools really do serve the needs of the true professional. And I think that's one of the things that really sets us apart. There's a lot of AI capabilities. A lot of them are okay, but there's not many where you're like, oh yeah, I'm giving up my traditional workflow to do that because it's totally better. You're oftentimes saying, I'm giving up my traditional workflow and doing that because it's pretty good and it's a lot faster. We want to say it's a lot faster and it's a lot better.
Interesting. Gotcha. Okay. And so what are some of these specific tools or products or features and things that you guys have?
So I'm thinking I'll probably have to share my whole screen. All right, so I'm going to show you a video that we have, and this is actually taken from our Enscape software seen on the right, and you see Rhino on the left. And what this is showing is our AI material generator. So what's first key to note here is that the AI material generator is actually found right in the same place that you go to look for assets. So if you're looking for material, this is where you go, which is our Cosmos library. And so we put this in there. So let's say you're looking for the perfect material and you're not finding it. Now, what you would end up doing is you take a image, maybe it's from the site, maybe it's from a product catalog. I don't know where you found that particular floor, but you really like it, you want it on the project. What you do is you upload that image, and then from there it creates all the maps that are required for visualization. And you can upload this, and when you do that, then it's able to create a digital material. Now, when it's creating that digital material, say it's not a perfect photo, it's at a slight angle, it'll flatten it. Maybe the lighting was a little strange. It'll do the right lighting. You're not really sure how to crop that image. It'll automatically crop the image for the best takeoff of that component. And then, of course, it brings it in, and the scale's crazy. But you can see it's like we do really these hybrid workflows where we recognize where AI is quite good at generating that material initially, but what it's not good at is understanding the scale of that material from the picture. But the artist really does. So that's something where then in the context of our tool, that can be very rapidly adjusted by the person doing the rendering. So you can imagine sort of this hybrid workflow where AI does some heavy lifting, but then the human, with their design eye, really understands certain elements are quite challenging for AI. And so we create these hybrid workflows that are incredibly efficient. So here we're doing another material, a concrete wall finish. I would say that would be a pretty fancy wall. it's kind of funny that a concrete wall ends up actually being more high-end architecture than anything. But you just drop that into the particular project here. So there we're applying that material in the context of Rhino, just like you would normally for an Enscape workflow. And what's nice here is that it's very quickly. You can visualize. You can see once again the scale is a little off. So we're adjusting that. And now we have the material in that particular project. So you can see what that would look like compared to, say, a traditional workflow where you take a material, you bring it into, you have a physical sample, you take a photo, bring it into Adobe Substance, adjust it, translate it into a material that's compatible with Enscape, you upload it into a custom material library. All that sort of thing it takes time. I was talking to some people last week, and they're like, well, I do that all the time for projects. I got 60 new materials per project, maybe more, and it's 20 minutes per on a good day. And some materials are really tricky, so it's going to be even longer. And so there's an example, like, how do you save that 10 to 15 hours a week? It's something like that, which is nicely integrated into your workflow.
Yeah, and it's challenging to just to elaborate on that process in the old school way, getting a photograph of the material that has flat, clean lighting and photoshopping and all that stuff. It takes time. And what I like about what you just showed us is when the AI software AI component, however you describe it, is doing its work, it outputs that initial material. Like you said, it still needs some tweaking, but it's really good. The tweaking is not like what we've experienced when you take a photograph of a material and then you have this weird shadow or reflection and whatever. It's
not seamless. And
it's a little easier tweaking, isn't it?
Yeah. That's
pretty
beautiful.
awesome.
And I agree, it's as architects and designers are so picky about stuff that there's no way any of us would be completely hands off with the materials we put in through the project through an AI.
No. And one of the updates actually that we have, I was going to show up. I thought, and I probably should keep some of this stuff behind the curtain until it's actually out in the wild. I have a bad habit there. But it's advanced controls for that AI material generation. So you can actually start to adjust the displacement maps and things like that, like much more sophisticated adjustments of that material after it's created. And it's all done via AI, which is pretty slick.
Gotcha.
And then you import the material. So it's we're bringing in more capabilities. So we're getting to this point of, okay, if we're releasing something that's AI, we want it to be as good as the traditional workflows. And I would say this first version you're seeing there, it's good.
Yeah.
But it is not going to replace, if you had that picky client, you're still going to have to go to the old school workflows, and that's not good enough for us. So that's coming.
Sounds good.
So this is another one. It's we called it our enhancer. And what's funny is, you're looking at some Enscape renders, you're like, whoa, you zoom in on an Enscape render, and you're like, this isn't that great. And there's a reason why it doesn't look that great. And it's not because these two people aren't wonderful. It's because it has to be simplified for the purposes of real-time visualization. There's a lot of model weight that comes with higher, more dense meshes, improved materials, and things like that. That's not what Enscape is about. So we wanted to provide a really easy workflow for people to get higher quality visualization out of Enscape without having to go to a whole nother rendering program. So they upload that image to our Chaos Cloud, and you can see here sort of an A/B comparison on what you get. And this is literally nothing done on the part of a person. This is all done via the AI agent to improve the quality. Now, the thing about that, though, is it's sort of a blanket improvement of resolution. But sometimes you want to actually target certain things, make certain things better. Not, maybe like, okay, everything looks a little clearer. I just put on my glasses, everything's sharp. But maybe I actually want to do some enhanced controls. The nice thing is this is all coming from our own ecosystem. So we have a mask for all the people, plants, things like that. We can identify what it is, and we can actually adjust, as you can see here through this interface, specifically you can adjust the ethnicity, you can adjust the gender, you can adjust their mood. So for instance, this guy looks really dour sitting on the couch compared to his wife or partner. Let's make him a little happier here. And there you go. Now he's not so unhappy, right? And so what did we just save you? We saved you having to go back through and do a re-render or place in a different asset and all of that. It makes a big difference. And now you can see, this comparison between the two. You can see it looks pretty unhappy. I'd say it's a big improvement. And it's a funny thing, right? It's small, but you think about what that would have meant traditionally. As far as target improvements.
So just for some bearings for the folks who are only listening, we're looking at an image of a rendering of two, we call it entourage, two people. Mm-hmm. And basically the enhancement is providing, it's hard to describe actually what it's doing. It's making it better. I guess it's higher res.
I say like putting on your glasses almost. Like this makes everything sharper.
Interesting.
And so what's interesting, so it's really just changing the render itself, right? Again, the model is not changing.
It's right. So this is what it's doing is taking just the render, it uploads it to our cloud automatically as part of the process. So we like to centralize all of our AI capabilities in one place. So we have a cloud service that does all this. It comes with your software. Okay. And so you upload it to your account right there, and then you can do all of these various types of sort of post-processing and enhancement and things like that. And so you can just do sort of a general upscaling, like take something from a 2K to a 4K or a 4K to, what have you, 8K or something. So if you really want to do a big printout and just make everything's exactly the same, just higher resolution, mm-hmm. Or you can do this where specifically target certain elements, change them specifically. And we've had some where, like for instance, you're doing an elder care facility. Mm-hmm. And it's all young people, and you're like, well, this isn't going to work. So you can easily select all the people in that picture, adjust them all to be older, and you're done.
And so is this, so the previous tool, the materials was embedded within Enscape. This is what we're looking at now. This workflow is outside of Enscape.
It is outside of, but you get to it right from, you can get to it from a lot of places, but basically from Enscape, you just go right to Enhance, and then it takes you to here. So think of it more of like another sort of a web app opens up in Enscape that allows you to edit it.
And so those changes could only be done to Enscape assets, or could they be done to, let's say, the building that we modeled?
So it'll improve the quality of the building itself as well. Okay. The upscaler will do that, and then we're bringing this capability also to building materials and things like that too. So you can select, say, I want to improve the quality of a particular building material, but nothing else. We can do that as well. So we're sort of expanding out the capability, but we started with people and plants as a sort of our first test case to see if the methodology works.
Fascinating. Cool. Fascinating.
So another element that I wanted to talk on is really not AI, actually, at all. And I think this is probably important because AI always gets all of the glory, but the truth is there's a lot of other very powerful processes that don't necessarily require AI in order to function. And we have one around building performance. We're able to understand how your building is going to perform from an energy consumption perspective just by modeling in Enscape. And so we're able, from Enscape, to automatically create a model that's compatible with energy analysis. And what's compatible with design is not the same as what's compatible with energy analysis. And so bridging that gap behind the scenes is something that we do sort of automatically. And what's interesting about this, though, is that we've gone from energy analysis, which is great, but now we've added thermal comfort. And I think this is pretty important because you can have a building that is great for energy performance, but it can actually be quite uncomfortable because you can just say, well, I'm not going to heat or cool this building, or something along those lines. And like, well, guess what? Right. We didn't spend any energy. So I remember actually I worked at the old firm. We used to always find that energy consumption would go up after a renovation of a historic building. You're like, but we put in all this insulation and efficient lights and all this, and it's basically just because all of a sudden you added systems where there were none before. But you still want to track comfort. And so we have now a thermal comfort module that's built into our impact tool that's available in Enscape. And then the other piece I think that's really slick about this, so here it is, you can select particular rooms. So the comfort is dependent upon the function of a given room. So if it's a exercise space, it'll have a different comfort requirement than if it's an office or a corridor. And then the other thing that we have that actually is AI related to some degree is an output report. So an actual PDF document in an Excel file that can be delivered as an output when you run an analysis. Now, that may not sound so interesting. And what's that have to do with AI? What's funny for me, though, is I took one of these reports and I ran it through AI. and said, can you recommend some improvements for my building? And I had to say it was pretty good because I have a fair bit of experience in this particular area of architecture. And I was like, yeah, that was some pretty sound advice. So it's interesting to see that, a workflow we absolutely did not intend, but it's out there and it's actually quite capable. It told me where I had some really problematic rooms and suggested interventions. I was like, wow, that's not bad. That's pretty sweet.
And so this is, I'm curious how the program works. I mean, I guess it's registered. It must be geolocated. It knows where the sun is coming from. It knows glazing. It must know also.
Yeah, it knows the code for where you're located.
Okay.
So the building code's variable, and it knows you have to put in 3 variables. You do have to put in where your building's located. We wanted to have it pull automatically, but then we realized not everyone bothers to put that in, or they have the wrong place, that kind of thing. So we just you just put in where you're located. Then you have to put in what your building does. So basically a sort of a rough program description. I mean, we have a series of drop downs from that. So it's pretty easy. Is it a hospital, school, dining facility, what have you, that kind of thing, home, resident, single family. And then what basically the last piece is, when was it last renovated? If it has been, or when was it built, or if it's new construction. Mm-hmm. And that's it. And then from there, we're able to pull the local building codes. From the location, you're able to pull, as you say, the sun angle, what they refer to as a TMY file, or typical meteorological year, which breaks down every hour of the day, down to the temperature, solar radiation, one would expect, things like that. Sort of like I wouldn't say it's quite the worst case scenario year, but it would be a rough year where it's sort of coldest and hottest generally. And sort of stresses your building a bit. And let's see, yes, I think those are the primary elements. Oh yeah, it also includes system types, and as you were saying, the glazing parameters would be required. Like for instance, here in California, if you're building a building out there, Title 24 dictates a lot of what your building has to be.
Yeah.
And so that provides certain constraints. So from that, we're able to understand, okay, what should my wall assembly R value be? What should the U value of the glazing be? Things like that. So it makes it a pretty efficient process to basically get that rapid number for an analysis to start with.
Does this require the model to be built in a specific software, SketchUp versus Rhino versus Revit?
No, that's why we did it with Enscape. The idea being is it could just be anything. And if we had wanted to go, say, with Revit, you get a lot of data that would be really valuable, like room identification and things like that. Mm-hmm. But then it doesn't work for the real purpose of something like this, which is early design when you're starting to explore ideas. And so, yes, this works anywhere basically Enscape works. It works because the data that it's pulling is actually from Enscape. It's not pulling it from the host application itself. So it's taking the model that Enscape has already generated for the purposes of visualization, and then using that as the basis for creating the model that's required for energy analysis.
Gotcha. What you're saying makes complete sense, because I think, there's different degrees of exactness in terms of building performance and energy efficiency and whatnot. And I think in more specific buildings and situations that requires, in-depth and very precise numbers. But for the most part, we did know big picture as we're designing if we're way far off, or to convey to the client, like there was a diagram shown that had, as you would imagine, a green, yellow, and kind of red zones.
Yes, your stoplight.
And say like, well, look, this is not going to be very comfortable if you
the glass
do a glass
box
roof.
Looks great, but
yeah. And that is, it's it's a specific point, but it's sometimes it's one of the things that I think clients sometimes don't realize as well as architects do. It's funny, like I feel like for a period of time, architects were always pushing for more glass, and that's probably still the case. And sometimes it's the opposite, where clients are pushing for a lot of glass, and it's like, well, if we do literally a glass box, you're going to be so uncomfortable.
We're giving you a greenhouse.
If you want to be a fern, fine, but okay, fascinating.
And then the last piece is around collaboration. This isn't necessarily an AI tool either. But I think it's just worthwhile to note that we recognize that our content's being used to communicate, and to communicate with a lot of different people. So you're actually seeing a 3D streaming capability. So directly from our software like Enscape or Envision or what have you, you can upload a full 3D model to our cloud service. This is all part of what you get with our software. And you're like, okay, you upload a 3D model, but then we actually have the ability to render right there in the cloud and then stream pixels anywhere. So this means that on an iPad, an iPhone, or a desktop without a graphics card, you can get the full experience because we are running, a full-powered machine in the cloud basically for you. And with that, you can do all sorts of commenting and things like that. So you can see we put in some comments. That comment will appear right away for anyone else that's looking at the same scene. And with that comment, you can actually tag other data. So you're like, hey, there's a tabletop. Here's 3 options. This is the manufacturer. This is how much it costs, things like that. It makes it so easy to share content with clients and things like that. All these views, you send them a link. We can adjust the permissions accordingly, things like that. And so it's part of what we recognize. What is our content used for? Well, it's used for communication. And that if you're going to communicate, you have to be able to communicate with all the different types of people, not just someone with a high-powered desktop computer.
And so I have a couple questions. For using this tool, is the 3D model that we would generate, an architecture office would generate, does it have to come with all of the details we're seeing, or is AI being used to infill some of the nooks
this
and
is
corners?
This is honestly what you've created from our software. So
Gotcha.
Really, this isn't an AI capability, but I thought it just worthwhile to note that there's this element of collaboration here, which you think is pretty key. So there's that piece, and I think the other piece just on that is, the idea of a client workflows, and how do you review and approve content. So we actually have now a whole approval workflow that's built into our software now. So you can share an image. They can say, no, I don't want it. You need to, I don't approve this. But you have other ones where you can say, yep, I approve, and it's basically logged as something that is client approved, and then that's done. And so it creates a really nice way of saying, okay, instead of emails, PDFs, and things like that, you're able to actually use a nice refined client review process that's all managed via our cloud service.
Yeah.
It's actually interesting because I think it ties into basically the customer experience from like the customer of architects, right? Like you said, like before it was like emails, PDF, have a call, have a meeting, and all of that stuff. But more and more, I think clients want much more back and forth, like quicker in terms of the interaction. And sometimes, it's even just a text message. Sometimes a link like this could be more digestible for them, and in a way maybe more fun and more engaging than like
they're spending
formal,
a lot of money, right? Like it should be fun. I hate the idea of them spending so much money and not enjoying the experience. But you bring up another.
It points to the broad spectrum of how architects practice, which is a different topic. But I was speaking with someone recently, and they're working with an office, and I was like, okay, how's it going? And it's a casual conversation, like, oh yeah, it's going. They showed us one option, and like, you've seen one option that's in the first presentation, and then one option and there's a revision, like that's it. Like, I don't know, maybe a lot of architecture offices practice that way. I highly doubt it. Like, I can't imagine not giving clients a bit more information to be engaged with, like just doing one sketch and being like, yeah, do you like it?
I mean,
like, it seems like that's a little bit crazy.
If you nailed it, but
yeah,
how
but
often
no,
do you
that doesn't
nail
work.
it?
I mean, it's like, to your point,
It's an
Marina,
iterative process.
It's an iterative process, but it also means it's a process that involves engagement and dialogue, and it should be fun. It should be, for folks who want to be engaged, of course, and they don't want to be hands off. It should be like that. And I think a lot of what you're describing, Roderick, is helping that cause for sure.
For sure. And there's a couple of other pieces there that I think are interesting, that I've seen at least, is the clients we're hearing about clients coming to the architect with something that they've actually generated via AI, for better or worse. They're like, hey, they're not coming with some cutouts from Dwell magazine or something. They're coming with a house that they render, like, this is what I want, build it. You're like, well, it's not quite that easy. But the other thing they're starting to do too is they'll take maybe they've been shared something with by the architect, been given a rendering or something. They're actually taking that and adjusting it via AI, and so they're not trying to just communicate verbally, saying, "Well, I liked it, but I wanted this." Actually, what they're doing is they're actually taking the content and then adjusting it, saying, with what they saw in their mind, adjusting the image accordingly, and then sharing that as part of their feedback. So it's a very different process, and I think part of this is that we're also looking at a shift in who's the client. Marina, you brought up a really good point, right? It's it's not our customer, it's our customer's customer, right? It's your client, and that client is getting younger. They grew up in sort of a different digital environment, a different expectation, and I think there's also a shift in expectation of how communication should work. I think as you get to perhaps nowadays, people expect a lot more communication, a lot more rapid communication, a lot more sort of affirmation as far as communication. It's not like you set a meeting in 2 weeks and then everyone just shows up in 2 weeks. There's usually a reminder, maybe a heads up, maybe a pre-read, and then you have a meeting.
Great observation. Yeah, that's a really good that's a really, really good observation. To touch on your story, your anecdote of clients using AI to leave comments, and clients using AI reference images that are not images found but produced, or maybe they're reference images that are AI that they found. We've seen that firsthand. So, we've always asked clients to supply a limited number of reference images that are, key conceptual things for the project. And that's okay. So usually the number is 5. And a couple of the images are usually conceptual, like images of the sunset, the mountains, like whatever, fine. But more recently, and then the 3 or 4 images are of architecture or interiors. The last, I don't know how many times, a good number of those are AI generated, unbeknownst to the client, perhaps. And so, of course, because we have a bit more of a trained eye, we can tell them. And so we joke, we say, this is not a real building. They're like, really? I'm like, no, it's AI for many reasons. I said, one of them is that there's no columns. I'm like, so we just need to be, like you said, it's more complex than just reproducing that thing. That's definitely true, because sometimes these images that we've seen, there's no columns. It's just like floating on a glass box. Yeah, exactly.
It's like, it looks awesome. I wish.
Yeah. I'm like, well, if we 10x the budget and we invent a new type of glass, then yeah, sure, we can do this. But then also, of course, what's the phrase that we use? A lot of the AI stuff that's produced is slop. Yes. And I think it's going to be, I can hear already a lot of the architects listening to this recording, and maybe especially the ones who have been practicing for a long time, like rejecting a lot of this and saying, no, I don't want more, more conversations with clients, more points for the clients to intervene and start saying, like, why don't we do this out of wood and whatever else, and using AI on their own to design. And I'm not saying that those architects are right or wrong, but it does mean that we're in this new territory, like you said at the beginning, and we, on the architect side, we're going to have to figure this out, because it's not going away.
It's not going away. And something else I'd say is that the value that, if you look at where AI is going, and you're going to start to see more and more of the process of architecture having the opportunity for automation. Like, you know that an AI-generated building is coming out. Autodesk invested $200 million in World Labs. They do. I don't know if you've seen what is it? I think it's it's a Worldview, and they do something called like Worldview Marble. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's basically they'll create what's called a Gaussian splat via prompt, and it looks like a world that you can navigate, and it's all done via prompt, 3D, and it's not precise enough to build a building off of, but Autodesk invested $200 million in them.
Wow.
Which you're thinking, okay, I reached out to a bunch of people I know, and I asked them, like, hey, what do you see about how something like this could work? And someone at a pretty high-powered firm gave me a whole workflow of how this can yield to geometry. And so you're thinking, okay, if that's that side of things, we're seeing AI capabilities start to erode other aspects that are in the architectural domain, like visualization. There's more and more AI there. Mm-hmm. You look at some of these startups like Snaptrude, where it might be doing some early site feasibility planning, things like that. There's a lot of different tools that are out there. Then what is the architect doing? Like, why, at some point, you still need the architect? And I'd say, well, the architect's providing service. They're providing that fundamental service that is going to give a superior experience to the client. And I think we need to be very sympathetic about what that client wants if you're going to be providing a superior service versus, your sort of your bottom feeder full AI firm, which is coming. You're going to have a firm that it's like AI architecture. And then you're going to have really high-end stuff over here, and probably a lot of people having to be competing in the middle for clients. And I think that competing on the service is going to be huge. And part of that service is, as you're saying, you let the client explore, you let them have fun, you let it be a little bit of a design negotiation with them. And you don't let them drive the design, but you let them be engaged in it.
Yeah. It's it's going to get weird. It's already weird. It's going to get weird. Yeah. I think I actually agree though with your kind of hypothesis of the future of the bottom. What'd you say? Bottom feeding architecture office. That's 99% AI.
Yeah, so AI bottom feeders, but yeah.
I agree with that. I think the delineation between the expert architects and expertise on one side and the other being like, it's good enough. I think that's going to be the delineation.
And you need a lot of good enough architecture,
Yeah, I agree.
I think I saw something where the 40% of construction spending currently is going to data centers and manufacturing.
Wow.
A lot of that good enough is good enough. It's a box. And maybe not with Windows.
I mean, I think that AI could be used in architecture, the idea of good enough, to just increase the overall beauty and just performance and all the things that make architecture, increase the average building that's produced to being hopefully 2x what it is now. And
well, hats off to you,
space.
Right? Yeah, because there's a lot of bad architecture right now. Couldn't AI make that better?
I know, at the very least, and I think. Let's be honest, a lot of the fear that creatives have with AI, whether it be in architecture or interiors or movie production or whatever, is at some level and a little bit out of self-preservation. But if I'm concerned about the built environment being productive for larger society, and there's a tool that automatically, again, makes 85% of the structures which are garbage be not garbage, that's an amazing thing.
Agreed.
And in the case of us, hopefully we exhibit our expertise to belong to that 15%, probably more like 5 or 10%. But I think I agree with kind of, a lot of things that you're saying about where stuff might land or how it all
But you're
falls.
a techno-optimist, which I really appreciate, David.
I think it's too easy to be,
right?
Yeah.
It is. It's easy to be. But I still feel like we as a company at Chaos, I want to help our customers navigate these turbulent waters. And I don't want them to get replaced by a full AI slop architecture firm, but maybe it won't be slop or like a full AI firm. I still want there to be a place for designers. I think buildings are beautiful because they had the individual intent of a designer reflected in them. So from our perspective, we want to make sure that we're giving tools for those designers to allow them to be increasingly competitive. And how do we do that? We make them more efficient. We make them more efficient to produce better designs, to deliver that superior customer experience.
I had a question about the tools. So this is going back now. The enhancement tool, it allows us to enhance and swap out, faces and things like that. Is there a feature in that section or somewhere else that also allows us to more greatly modify the building or the site? So let's say, for example, I have a building or a landscape and I'm like, you know what, we need to show a pool here. And I, lasso that area and say, add pool.
I mean, we had something like that was a little, I'd say it was kind of like a little bit of a children's toy in our Veris software. And Veris is our full AI visualization software. And that was a standalone capability. So you could access it via the web, and you could upload everything from like an AutoCAD image and make that into an actual 3D scene, or it integrated directly into Forma, Allplan, Vectorworks, SketchUp, Rhino, Revit, you name it, everywhere, because it was actually pretty easy to integrate that. And then we had actually an integration, and we have an integration directly in Enscape as well, where anything you see in the Enscape viewport can be brought directly over into Veris. So you can do kind of this AI treatment of it to do what you're describing. Now, the first version of this, though, we had, you could do sort of what we call in-painting, where you could select an area and give a prompt for that area.
Mm-hmm.
And it was pretty chunky. I mean, it worked, but it was not awesome, I would say. But it was definitely better than not having the capability. But one of the things that we're seeing, and maybe has driven a lot of the rapid shifts that we're seeing as far as visualization capabilities in the last few months, is Google released what they referred to somewhat humorously as Nano Banana, which is their rendering, their visualization tool that they have as part of Gemini. And so we started using that, and it's not only is it really good, but in addition to that, we have the ability to draw on that render output that you might have, or whatever image you might have. So for instance, you can put a red X over something, and then in the prompt you say, remove red X and replace with Y. Or if you wanted to have something be water in a particular location, you can just draw the blue line and say replace the blue line should be a creek running through with a bridge over it or something, and it's done. And we have some examples on our website and other things that show this, but it's really interesting because it's almost like communicating to another designer what you want. You can imagine just pinning it up and like kind of screwing it with a red pen. Mm-hmm. And then you kind of say, hey, and do this with where I marked this up, and it'll do it. And it does a really good job.
Interesting. And wait, so
Scary good job.
That's through Veris?
That's through our Veris software. Yeah, I didn't show that, but it's like I say, it's our AI visualization capability. It's also integrated right into Enscape as well. A really powerful tool, and it's one that, because we're leveraging a third party's AI rendering or visualization engine, it's very, like, I would say that its capabilities are pretty amazing. I mean, you have a huge company, Google, behind its development. Gotcha. And then on top of that, you have our expertise on architectural workflows and how people might actually be interacting with that content. And so you put these two things together and you end up with a very powerful capability.
That's wonderful. And so getting more into the technicality of it, because we spoke about this before, there's a difference. So for the listeners who don't understand how any of this works, and Roderick, you can explain this much better than me, but there's a difference when a software allows you to interact. How do I phrase this? Like you're interacting with a 2D image and a representation of the model, and you're altering that, versus being able to alter the model itself, or rather I should say, like select things from the model. So in the first instance where it's an image, you are selecting just an area of an image. In the other example though, when you select something, you're actually selecting the wall in the model. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
And it does. So what I think right now, most AI only interacts with 2D space because that's where all this content has been trained thus far. It's been trained in environments like on basically what's on the web. And there's a ton of images on the web. There's some videos on the web and things like that, but that's all 2D content. There is no large accessible repository of 3D content in order to train these capabilities. So that's one of the reasons why we've seen that to be much slower to develop as a capability. So the AI to which it's available right now is absolutely 2D focused. And that's, I think, that's a big part of it. The other thing that we are seeing, though, is we're starting to see ways in which you can go from 2D to 3D in certain ways. And that's starting to become a thing because you're able to have a recognition. Let's say you were to prompt an image, or you have an image that you created via AI, and you really like the lighting layout. You could actually say, okay, take this lighting layout, and I want to reflect that as geometry back into my Revit model. And that's something actually that we have as a proof of concept internally, where you can do something like that. Now it goes into your Revit model, and then from your Revit model, you can now visualize it in Enscape. And so there we're starting to see kind of this little bit of a circuitous route where you can start to interact with AI into 3D space. But all the stuff that you have out there, by and large, from the big entities, is going to be purely 2D in its thinking. You're seeing some startups that are kind of playing in the 3D space, but I'd say it's currently nowhere when it comes to being competitive with traditional modeling as far as precision and accuracy and alignment with intent. And then you get, of course, to that big investment that Autodesk made in Worldview Labs. And I think that's where people are like, okay, someone's trying to make a big move to go from sort of an AI to 3D space. And I think that would be the big one. But I did mention that also, like, Worldview Lab, it does Gaussian splats, so you can kind of prompt that, but that's not geometry in the sense of something you can build off of. It's much more of like almost like a point cloud and photogrammetry combined.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. And there's to your point, there's a big departure between a rasterized image, a Gaussian splat, and then, of course, construction documents.
There is. There's a huge difference between
gap between those. Yeah.
Right. And there's this whole element of liability that also comes with the construction documents themselves, right? And so that's the other piece where it's like, well, how... I don't care if it's AI or not, you're still on the hook. And so that's the other piece where you're still going to take a huge amount of intent and oversight to make sure that is exactly what you want. And then we also actually have an AI sort of assisted tool. It's much more deterministic for the creation of construction documents called Glyph. And one of the things that we've found is that creating construction documents, which we can do via prompt, people set up sort of a series of workflow modules and does auto dimensioning and sheet packing and all this kind of stuff, is that if it doesn't align with the firm standards for documentation, it's going nowhere. And there's usually a couple of old timers at a firm who are like, they're the gatekeepers of documentation, and if you don't abide by what they require, forget about it. You're going nowhere. And so that's one of the big pieces we're finding too, is like, fine, you can use AI for that if you want, but it better be AI that's absolutely aligned with how that firm does it, because that is, that end of the day is what they're getting paid for. It's where their liability is going to reside. It's where their reputation is. That drawing set is incredibly important.
Yeah. Real quick, are you good on time?
Oh yeah.
Oh, okay, cool.
I just had to make sure that a dishwasher wasn't emptied while we were on the podcast. School's out.
Okay, awesome. The full transparency. Again, zooming back into the enhancer. So it's funny. So what we've seen is that, so let's say pre-AI, the renders being produced in Enscape and other similar softwares, for those who have not yet got on the Chaos ship, are really, really good. And I'm thinking, of course, comparing to when I was in school, if you did a rendering that had anything close to realistic shadows, it took 14 hours.
And you had to learn how to use the software.
And it was a gray box, or a gray soft shadow thing at most, and you photoshopped materials and whatever else. And as of 2018, 2020, whatever, now we have Enscape, and it's like phenomenal. But then now it's like folks are used to seeing AI generated images that have all the bells and whistles of a nicely composed image. So what I'm describing has nothing to do with the quality of the design itself, but instead the quality of, let's say, the photograph, right?
Yeah,
the lighting is
getting
good.
Getting photoreal is not that hard anymore. I mean, it's
and it's like it's dusk. There's a nice car in the drive. There's all these things.
Right. There's volumetrics and all this stuff. I mean, it is tough. Like, looking at some of the content I see people generate. So there's interesting workflows where they'll use an LLM agent they'll take like a screen cap, use an LLM agent to describe what they're seeing in that screen cap, and then they use that screen cap plus the LLM agent, and then maybe like a material mood board or something like that. And they say, okay, from that, generate an image that from another agent describes what they want, like, golden hour, Malibu, beachside, whatever. Yep. And then they get just a stunning image out of it. And because it's all described with this agent, has a fairly long prompt that agent spits out, they can actually take that one image and say, okay, this looks great. Can we zoom in on the countertop here? And it'll hold all the elements constant in the context, and then zoom in on that one element, and you'll get another perfect photoreal image. Or you can even say rotate around 45 degrees and do the same picture, and it'll do that. Like, just make stuff up, but because it understands the overall scene, it's able to do that incredibly effectively. And you think about, well, what would that take using traditional knowledge and tools, right? That would have taken probably a year of learning to use a really good rendering software at a high end. It would have taken hours to actually, like maybe a week or so, to actually create the content itself. So yeah, there's some major shifts happening for sure. And so we have to, of course, say, okay, well, maybe that's good enough for 75% of the market. How do we serve them in a way that is really superior? And then how do we also continue to develop our really high end, sort of our, our Leica camera tools and things like that for those that need that have clients and projects that justify that top tier performance.
So are you guys wanting to get into more of that space of, I guess I would call it sort of like, I guess, enhancing the overall image to change the lighting so it's golden hour and all the kind of sex appeal that comes with kind of stuff?
I mean, I would say, I don't know if we, yes, maybe. I guess you can't, I mean, let's just put it this way. We want to make sure that we're still competitive. I think if you're not doing that, you're not in the game. So I think for our perspective, there's two different camps. One is that you want to maintain these high control, best in class workflows, which we have, and we have a huge repository of experience. And then the other side is we have with our Varus tool, really high end AI visualization that can do what you're describing. You can either post process an image or you can create one from scratch. It doesn't really matter. It's all kind of a similar process. And then I think there's probably that next generation in the middle, which is where you start to combine the types of nuanced control that we have with our software that we've developed over 30 years of working in the field with an AI rendering capability. And you start to make that a two-way street. So if you generate something via AI, great, it's a wonderful image. The lights are just this or that. You have these objects placed. Well, maybe I want that light to have a slightly different color temperature. Well, then maybe it was an AI created image or scene as it would be, but you can actually select that light and the settings for the light will show up in our traditional software accurately, and you can adjust them through our traditional workflow as well. And then that'll be reflected back in the AI generated image. So it ends up becoming this point where it's either your AI or your manual workflow, but you're working on the same outcome simultaneously.
Yeah. And it also, a lot of what you're describing, I think you said this earlier, it's really kind of like, it's almost like you're working with traditionally with a junior designer or designer, but instead of being a physical person, it's just a piece of software. Yeah. Try this change. Okay. Oh, it's done. Okay, that's fast.
I mean, the other thing though is it can also be a really patient tutor. We're working on some agentic capabilities, and that's the other thing. Like I've been doing some vibe coding on the side, dangerously enough. Nothing's broken yet. And what's interesting I'm noticing there is that the ability for a lot of these AI tools to function as a very, very patient teacher. And that's the other nice thing. I think it can present a whole new way for people to learn how to use various tools and how to visualize by essentially interacting with and saying, hey, I really want to change how this light looks. I want to make it darker or brighter or more orange, but what settings do I go to do that? You don't,
I see.
And you're not turning to the person here. You can just ask, and you can get that. And it's a very different way of learning and understanding how to use the software.
Shifting over to the topic of our industry, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on I don't know if you have stats, but like just generally what you've seen with the adoption of these tools with different sizes of offices and where things are headed. Because I know you mentioned that in the beginning, that kind of factoid of
the mid-size firms.
Mid-size, and obviously there's the large size, the mid-size, and then small practices. And I don't know. So for example, I heard the other day on some podcast or something that for companies that are not architecture related at all, they're saying that the large companies have been able to adopt AI for some time now, and they are 20%, 30%, 50% more productive each employee, which makes a huge difference for these companies that are like 10,000, 20,000 people, and the smaller companies who are not as easily able to adapt anything new, because of course their time is stretched thinner, are going to fall way, way behind.
Yeah, I agree. I call it the barbell effect in some ways. You have the high-end firms, whether they're very large ones or they're boutique architecture, still able to preserve their revenue. And then I see the sort of the rise of, not quite yet, but I suspect you're going to see very low fee, high AI work on the other end, and then you're going to have sort of your rank and file, your normal firms in the middle really getting squeezed, finding it harder and harder to be competitive. And that's one of the things I do worry about. And that's why I say the importance to us is to provide tools to help those people continue to succeed in a lot of ways by delivering sort of that superior outcome that justifies why you have a really good designer. Because not everyone can afford that top flight firm or the really boutique architects, but they might be able to afford a designer, or they should be able to to afford a designer.
Yeah.
Now, as far as adoption goes, for sure, we're seeing a skew. Now, the biggest skew, though, is at the top firms, we're starting to see more creation of their own tool sets. They're able to leverage their own repositories of data for training. So whether maybe some of them are starting to explore even ways in which they can automate aspects of design by mining old Revit models, for instance. They have tens of thousands of models, and tens of thousands, and maybe not tens of thousands for one typology, but they might have thousands for one specific typology. And that gives them a pretty robust training set that they can start to use. In one firm I was talking to, they said, they do something that's basically pretty repetitive type of architecture. And they said, we're able to now generate the bulk of the geometry for sort of the back of house stuff automatically. And then it allows for our designers to really focus on that front entrance, the atriums and things like that. Sort of the star performers when it comes to what the client engages with. And then all the other very functional space, they said, it's getting more and more automated. That's a huge advantage, and that is really challenging for a smaller firm that doesn't have the technical resources to develop that type of capability, and B, doesn't even have the data set in order to be able to do that. And I think that's when I think about people talk about digital moats and things like that. Sort of like what can you really hang your hat on? I'm starting to see more and more that data itself is becoming one of those moats that's incredibly important. And then I think particularly in the world of software, do you actually have a platform that's pretty significant? And I've been talking to some other people, and they're saying, no, you're still missing the boat. The real digital moat is actual hardware. It's the physical. So I don't know if it's gotten quite that extreme yet, but it's an interesting perspective.
It's a lot for the mind to comprehend. I don't know. I'm still just thinking that so many architecture offices are probably fearful because effectively they might be losing jobs in a certain sense. But
I think any major shift in an industry does that. Like when BIM came about, it was a big deal. Right? Like, parametric architecture. Oh my God, this is going to ruin, architecture. We're going to do, the same types of buildings. And look, years later where we're at, I think any time there is something new kind of disrupting the flow of things, there is a reactive reaction to it, which is like rejection and fear, right? But I think once we get to understand and play with it, like you mentioned, and just kind of like try it, I think we're each going to find our own way of using it, and that's what's going to create the new wave of architecture. I think that's going to be super interesting.
Well, I like that your point there, Marina, is like you just get it and work with it, and I think that's a good point, because if you don't do that, it's going to stay this looming specter. So, play with it and figure out how it works. Just sort of demystify. But then the second thing is through that play, which begin to discover ways to make it your own. I think that was a fantastic point, right? Like exactly, not everyone should be using AI the same way, and I think that's the place that'll be really fascinating, is how you start to make it your own. Large firms have started to do that very quickly, but I think that the type of work they invested in is now going to be more and more accessible. I'd say probably if someone got a thing of Claude and said, hey, I'm an architectural practice, this is a process I want to improve the efficiency of. Can we work through some ideas to make that happen? Honestly, it would be that simple. And then just start working through it, and then, come up with some ways to improve the efficiency. So I think there's ways in which exactly that, they can sort of negotiate and find for themselves in the practice how they want to implement AI.
We've gone through a lot of stuff, man. This is like a lot to, and the crazy thing too is because the timelines things are happening so much faster. It's like we have to.
I know, it really are accelerating. I thought when I started working, I was employee 100 at Enscape, and then I went over to Chaos, and when that all happened, AI visualization wasn't even a glimmer in anyone's eye at the company.
Mm-hmm.
We had no idea, and now all of a sudden it's a very, very different landscape.
So we'll probably have you back in a month, and things would have changed.
I know. Guess what, guys? Completely different.
Like, scratch that. Just take that old podcast off. We got something new here.
And then the third time we'll have you on. The building's done. What? Our building's
exactly.
done. Yeah.
I know. Well, that's one of the things when it came to this World Labs investment by Autodesk, and how quickly would something like that happen? And I love the range of responses I got from it's Autodesk. Like, you might need to be patient to, I think this is going to happen a lot faster than people think. Yeah. I'm sure the truth's somewhere in the middle, but it's scary.
It sounds like, so one of the larger debates in AI and creative industries is again, there's this belief, there's not only sometimes a disdain for it, but a disbelief that it's ever going to produce anything great or good. But I have my own predictions as that it sounds like, with what you're describing, if you were to try and predict the future, that it will get to a point where it can produce pretty good quality architecture.
That I have no idea. I mean, I have no argument whatsoever. I think it will produce pretty darn good architecture versus traditional, but will it be the true greats? I doubt it. But I would also say that a great architect using AI can be even better. That I also have 100% confidence in.
Yeah, I love that. And probably produce more work too. Like the volume of work can be much higher.
And that would be nice to have more great architecture floating around out there.
That's actually, but that's a good point because...
Yeah, because what's the average, timeline it takes for an office to design one building,
Well, the other thing too, I mean, let's be honest, the majority of the design phases takes place, it takes long because it takes time to work with the client. That's more... Yeah,
the clients do hem and haw and whatnot, but I think that's something too where via some of these tools you can drive that collaboration piece. And it's a little bit of what our collaboration tools around. It's like making very definitive decisions and moving forward. And then the other piece that we haven't even touched on, if not to go back again to this World Lab, but NVIDIA invested a ton of money. And if you were to talk to and look at what NVIDIA is really interested in, they're looking at that next $1 trillion industry, and a big one is robotics. So the big disruption may not actually be in the world of architecture. It may actually be in construction. It's trying to automate aspects of that. And then you start to say, okay, well, what if we are able to get a lot more great architectural designs, and we have expedited construction processes, and hey, let's go full bore here and say we're also starting to have improved code review processes, also leveraging AI.
They'll be last, let's be honest.
They'll be last,
that's right. That's another
they'll still ask for it to be faxed in, but everyone else,
That's another industry where I feel like, like permit review and all that stuff could use AI and be like way more efficient.
Yeah,
agreed. And there's some processes, They're like, I think Australia, there was a company called, I believe it was called CodeStar or something like that in Australia, which is doing that. But you really have to have, for any company that's doing that, it's going to have alignment between the designers, the tools, and the governing authority. And that's a lot of stakeholders to all get on board.
Yeah.
That's a really good overview, though, of those three different, layers or aspects: the design, the construction, and then the approvals. I mean, if all three get hit and adopt these things, then it's going to be so much better. I was thinking this last bit of the conversation, you've probably heard this from architects, but the profession has been, in my view, struggling for some time, and in many ways losing its agency, amongst clients for a variety of reasons. I'll pick out a few that are easy to pick on. Like design build comes in and that kind of disrupts stuff. And we have interior designers. Some are really good. A lot of them are underqualified, claiming to do what architects do. And the profession of architecture has become, it's not a great spot in my personal take. And actually, Toshika Mori, who we had on the show years ago, made a very interesting statement, which has stuck with me, which is that our profession is quite fragile. And she went on to expand kind of in the way that I'm describing, that it's easy for us to be eroded, by developers for cost reasons, by design build, by all this other stuff. But it could be that if we embrace these tool sets and we leverage them correctly, that could actually be maybe the solution or savior, in a sense, to making sure our profession thrives and is actually to be able to be very productive for our clients rather than the opposite outcome.
I mean, I like that because you look at fees and they've been tracking down. You look at Architectural Billing Index, and I think it's been down 37 in the last 40 months in the U.S., the AIA Billing Index.
Wow.
So it's kind of, it's a harsh environment, right? And then you also have a situation, so clients are driving down fees, asking for more efficiency. You have an overall environment where things are moving. And then you have, I think because of a lot of the liability in particular, architects oftentimes have to have a scope that essentially gets disaggregated and parted out to various people. So they get less and less of the pie. And I think there's an opportunity with tools like this to say, okay, now all of a sudden I have the efficiency to be able to take back some of that scope, take back some of that capability. And I think you're right that this is an opportunity for them to say, okay, here's the new tool set that allows me to get back in the game in a way that's meaningful. But I think to do that, though, people have to use them. And how they're going to use them, they're going to have to find out for themselves. I don't think any firm should be in the position of kind of like waiting to see where the dust settles. This is one of the things, like there's no reason why you shouldn't get in there right now and see where it can benefit you.
This is wonderful. I think we should wrap it up there, unless you have any closing remarks, but we covered so many things, and this was just really, really interesting.
Well, it's always a great conversation. I loved it last time. It was a great conversation this time. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, and we'll have you back on again. What is it, 10 days is the next time?
I know. It's scary, but I do like the fact that it's so dynamic.
Yeah.
And I think it also, like I said, it makes the challenge for all of us to say it's not just, well, here's something that came up in a meeting, maybe my parting words, is we had our CEO talking about all of this and how it's a challenging environment and that we need to really respond. And she asked if anyone had any questions. And I commented, and it's like, well, if that's how we feel, just imagine how all of our customers feel. And I think that's one of the things there is like we really do want to have that deep empathy and be people's partner as they go into this next phase of AI design. I mean, chaos is there.
That's beautiful. And I do have to say that having these conversations with you have been very meaningful, not only for the information, but I think the reassurance that we have people within our broad space that are thinking about these things and kind of like have our backs, and also to kind of peek behind the curtain and say like, how's it going for you guys? I think it helps us all feel much more unified and comfortable and confident moving forward, and getting to look behind the curtain a little bit and
a little bit,
yeah.
Maybe one of these days I'll get clearance, or maybe I'll just go rogue and really show you some cool stuff. We got some wild stuff that's happening.
Yeah, I'm sure.
It would be cool to see all the stuff that you're not really seeing.
Well, maybe
of course
we
it
can
would
do
be,
this
but
outside of the context of a podcast.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Cool. Thanks, Roderick, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you so
Absolutely.
much.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for watching this video on YouTube. If you like what we're doing, then please support our show by hitting that subscribe button.
You can also find us on most of the social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We're mostly on Instagram. And you can reach out to the hotline, 213-222-6950. You can send a text message or leave a voicemail if you have any reaction to this recording, any questions you might have, or guest suggestion. Feel free to send it our way.
Cool. Thank you for watching, and see you next week.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.